Hey, what's up guys? Nick the Informative Fisherman here, and today I'm going to be breaking down bass lures via the time of year and conditions. I want to fill you guys in on a little bit more information. A lot of people say, oh, why do we have to know all this, and why do we have to have so many lures? You know, water temperature and conditions, how the sky changes, how the wind is, how the clarity of the water is always going to dictate a different lure or a different type of movement or more audible. So you have to have all these tools available to you. I get asked the question, how come we need to know all this? Can't we just go out and have fun? And yeah, if you know absolutely nothing about fishing and you go out to fish, you're relying on 100% luck. The more you learn and the more pieces of knowledge you acquire in this game we call bass fishing, this is an education game. You're acquiring more pieces to this puzzle that you can place together depending on that time of year, that time of day, and you get a much better picture of what you're looking at, to where you're removing a big portion of luck out and you're adding more skill. So this is why you have to have all these different lures. This is why you have to have all this different knowledge. If you don't care if you catch them or not, maybe this video is not for you, but hopefully the ones that do enjoy this can absorb a whole lot more information from this video and put more fish in the boat. So let's get started. So let's start off with early spring, since today's March 3rd or 4th. What I want to explain here is early spring. I'm going to call early spring when that water temperature's close to 50 degrees. It's getting there, all right, to where it's still very cold. We could have had some rains. The bass are cold, they're lethargic, but they're starting to think about spawn. They're starting to think about that pre-spawn. They're starting to think about eating, but they're still very, very cold. So when it comes to my bait selection, when that water's nearing 50 degrees, I'm still going to fish a lot of the same stuff I fished in the winter time, but I'm going to start looking a little closer to the creek channels or looking closer to the points leading into the bays, and I'm going to fish small. You know, I'll still throw a jerkbait if it's clean and clear. If that water's clean and clear, I'm going to still throw a jerkbait. I'm going to fish tiny baits like a Ned rig. I'm going to fish a drop shot. I'm going to fish a shaky head along with that jerkbait. But I want you to keep in mind and a jig. So let's start off with the conditions when the water temperature is probably 48 to 50 degrees and maybe in the low 50s, 52, 53, that range right there. So what I'm going to look for is, I'm just referencing down to my notes here. So water temperature, of course, that's the biggest role in the early spring. The colder it is, the smaller and the slower I want to fish. Now I want to explain something. I start small and then move up. I'll fish a Ned rig, I'll fish a drop shot or a shaky head, and if I start catching small fish, I understand that the majority of the fish in the winter are they're schooled up. You know, 2 out of 3 bass tend to be schooled up, to where if you catch a small fish, then I might try a larger jerkbait, or I might throw a jig in that same spot, or drop shot a slightly larger worm to find that bigger bass. Now, if the water's clear and clean, and I'm generally looking semi-deep that time of year. I don't expect the fish to be too shallow unless I'm in a river. So I'm looking pretty deep, to where a lot of jerkbaits won't get down super deep. A drop shot will, a jig will, a shaky head, a Ned rig will get down there deep. If it's clear, I'm going to throw natural colors, okay? I'm going to throw greens, I'm going to throw browns, natural colors. If that water's muddy, I'm going to throw a color like a black or a pure white, and maybe add a glass rattle to it, or have a jig, something slightly bigger, a little bigger profile on there, and put a crawdad trailer like an armor craw on the back of there with some glass rattles if that water's muddy, because they need to feel it, they need to get that displacement. But if it's clear and cold, I'm going to throw a smaller plastic in a more natural color, and I'm focusing on the bottom if it's cold and clear. Now, as that water muddies, okay, if that water's getting a lot of run in and you're going to throw that same small stuff, you can add a glass rattle to it. Natural colors aren't very good if the water's muddy. If you can put your hand under there and you're losing visibility about a foot or two, you want to start going with more audible or slightly a bigger profile. Instead of throwing a a 3 or 4 inch drop shot worm. If it gets muddy, you might want to throw a 5 or 6 inch. Also, in the spring, I like to avoid wind. I'm looking for calmer water. That being said, cleaner, calmer, yeah, that's usually a good thing in the spring. And early in the spring, I'm also targeting areas that has the most sun. All right, I'm looking where the sun's coming up in the morning, and I'm going to try to find rocky, steeper transition banks, because in the wintertime, they like to be on that stuff where they can go down deep and come up, and they like to be in the area that's going to be slightly warmer. So, with that being said, with those, that's the area I'm going to target with those smaller baits. Steeper, rocky areas that get more sun, because the water's still not quite warm enough yet. So later in the day is going to be your better bite in the early spring. All right, later in the day, because the fish are going to get acclimated to the water slightly warming, to the later evening bite tends to be much better in the early spring. Now, let's get into what I call the pre-spawn part of spring. That's when that water reaches 55 to 58 degrees. Fish's eggs are incubating. Okay, the female's eggs are incubating, and we're referencing largemouth here for the most part. Now, they're getting active. Around 55 to 58 degrees, that pre-spawn is going to kick in. And according to conditions in the pre-spawn, a lot of the conditions don't really apply. It could be overcast, it can be sunny, and the water can be clear. In the pre-spawn, the fish get very, very active, and you could show them a lot of things. This is a good time of year to throw something like a big glide bait, or a bluegill glide bait, or a larger topwater. If that water's closer to 58, 60 degrees, the big topwater is going to come into play. But if it's closer to 55, 58, bumping a big Huddleston across the bottom, because they're still associating to the bottom on those early temperatures. But you can use a variety of baits. When it's pre-spawn, you could throw chatter baits, you could throw square bill crankbaits like that Bill Lewis Echo right there. You could throw such a variety. So some of the fish are going to be in pre-spawn around 55 to 58 degrees. They're going to be in pre-spawn, and some of those fish are still going to be in that early spring funk to where they're transitioning. And a lot of the time, when they're transitioning, you're going to have those fish that suspend. This is where something like a spoon is going to come into play. And I know if they're hungry, I'm going to go with a bigger spoon. I know if that water temperature is right around, low 50s to mid 50s, they still might be keying in on smaller stuff, to where I would do like a jigging spoon, like a laser minnow or something I can jig straight up and down on suspended fish. Now, how I select my lures, I still want to go with that water clarity, how windy it is. Now, in that pre-spawn, that windier bank, the one that's getting more current, is going to have more active fish. This is where looking at the water temperature is very, very critical. You want to find the warmer water temperature. If you're out in the spring looking for that slightly warmer water, it's going to put you on more active fish. So, well, I'm going to glance down here, look at my notes. So we have water temperature, which I just covered right there, the sky. A clear, sunny day around that pre-spawn temperature doesn't matter too much. The fish are going to be active and actively feeding. Wind helps. Anything that's going to get a little bit of chop on the surface, those fish are going to move shallower, and they're going to feed in that area. So a little windier bank could help with a square bill. It can help with a chatterbait. If it's calm, you might want to go with something more subtle. You might want to try throwing something like a Senko, or something like a jig, or a more subtle topwater. If you have a slight chop and the water slightly stained, that's where something like a buzz bait, like the Evolution Baits grass burner, can come into play, and that can help a lot. So watercolor. Definitely you want to select a bait that's contrast to that watercolor. If it's clear, you want to use something that they're feeding on, something that looks like a bluegill, something that looks like a crawfish. If the water's muddy, using something like a pure white or a very, very dark color can be good, or something that makes a lot of noise in that pre-spawn, like a square bill or a crankbait deflecting off the rocks, makes a lot of audio, makes a lot of noise, has a ton of displacement, they can find it. The depth. When that water temperature gets 55 to 60 degrees, you're going to find the majority of your bass are, 10 feet or shallower. They're getting up there, they're staging, they're looking to feed. So you want lures that are going to be fishing that target zone, which is good because the majority of bass lures out there, that's that target range. Not everything's designed to be fished super deep. In the pre-spawn, moon phase is huge. If you're closer to a full moon, when that water temperature is 55, 58 degrees, a lot of bass are going to be active at night. They're going to be getting closer to those banks. They're going to be roaming around to find spots to start building their beds. You're going to have some of the bigger fish move up early on beds. So go out there and night fish when that water temperature is around there near a full moon. Night fishing can be phenomenal. Current and tide I have on here. If you have a strong current, whether that's a wind current or you have a tidal system where there's a lot of current, fish are going to actively feed around that current. If that water temperature is below 55, a lot of the time they don't like a strong current. They like a semi-strong current. Once that water temperature is 60, 70 degrees, they're going to be in that stronger current along structure and cover, because it makes it easier for them to pinpoint what they're feeding on for that time of year. So that's your pre-spawn time.
Hang with us, guys. We'll be right back.
Hey guys, did you know that Yours Truly is now hosting Lucky Tackle Box's monthly panfish instructionals? And aside from relentless fish catching, I'll be breaking down the rigging and the gear you need to get going along the way. And of course, a few extra tips to help you score more fish on the goodies included in your box. So remember, the tug is our drug. So go visit LuckyTackleBox.com and get signed up today.
Bigger, better, badder. The evolution of the buzzbait is upon us. The Evolution Baits Grass Burner is a high-performance bass snatcher machine. High-end components, inline displacement, larger profile, balanced body for fast or slower retrieves, better deflection, and oversized treble hooks. You wouldn't bring a slingshot to a gunfight, would you? Find out more at evolutionbaits.com. Ever tried pulling a planer board next to your boat when trolling or fishing from a swift current bank? If not, you're missing out on one of the most phenomenal fish catching machines on the market today. With Yellowbird planer boards pulling your lines perpendicular to your boat, you can't help but catch more fish. Find out more by visiting www.yellowbirdproducts.com. Did you know that P-Line makes specialized lines for all your fishing needs, from the super strong abrasive resistant CXX or the low stretch super stealthy CX Premium? Or maybe you're looking for invisibility or super bite detection with P-Line's 100% fluorocarbon. No matter what your needs, P-Line's got it covered. To find out more, visit P-Line.com.
P-Line, baby.
Oh, you heard they got weapons of big fish destruction? Well, you heard right. BWA Fishing Performance is the newest company hitting the U.S. market by storm. With some of the sickest swim baits around and non-cookie cutter style lures that you could ever get your hands on, it's time to show these fish something new. Visit BWA.com. Attention Northern California anglers, have you been to Boat Country in Escalon with one of the largest selections of welded aluminum fishing boats from North River, Hughescraft, and now Crestliner? Chances are they have the right boat for you. And did I mention they have a full service center to take care of all your repair or boating maintenance needs? If you're a boat owner or just looking to become one, you owe it to yourself to check these guys out. Visit BoatCountryUSA.com or stop on by. We'll see you there.
Okay, so now we're getting into the spawn part of spring. This is that 58 to upper 60. Sometimes they'll spawn into the low 70s. I've seen it, but we're gonna target this range from 58 degrees to 65 degrees. This is where you start seeing fish on beds. Lure selection. If it's low light first thing in the morning, throwing a topwater over that real shallow, hard banks is going to be really good. Any topwater you want. If you're not getting bit on those, throwing a square bill, a crankbait, something that's going to deflect off the bottom where they have their beds, you're going to get bit like that. They're going to be protective around those beds. During the low light hours, some of them are still feed, but most of the time they're not in a feeding mood, so getting them to react is huge. Something like a crankbait can force them to react. Chatterbait can get them to react. Anything coming through there bumping the bottom, a swim jig, anything causing a disturbance that's going to force them to react and protect those beds is huge. As the sun comes up, if you're looking to bed fish, this is where you want to use solid color lures or bright color lures, something you can throw up on the bed, something that you can physically see. Most of these fish on the bed are protecting the bed, especially the male. The male doesn't care. If it's a bright solid color and you want to catch the male, remember, catch it, put it right back. Don't stick it in the live well unless you're fishing a tournament or you think it's some sort of record fish, then go ahead and put it in the live well. But definitely don't keep a bass. If you're a catch and keep guy, don't keep a bass if they're spawning. Please let it go and keep them in the summertime or the fall or something if that's really what you need to do. But a male bass is just strictly protective. If there's a female bass up there, you want to use natural looking bed rating things like a bluegill or something like a crawfish. And a female bass that's near that big male bass, she will still eat natural presentations. But if you're strictly trying to catch a fish off a bed, use a very bright color that you can see. Now, if it's windy, you want to go back to something like a square bill if you can't see that. But you want to search out that calmer, cleaner water if you're trying to bed fish. But remember, not all fish are going to be bedding at the same time. There's always going to be some of them in pre-spawn, some of them in post-spawn. So you will have those options available. That being said, we're going to get into the post-spawn part of spring. Now, this is when the majority of them are done spawning. You're going to see a fish here and there, or you're going to see a male and a bunch of little tiny minnows around him. That's the fry. He's protecting that. That means the females have now either moved deeper to the nearest deep spot or into heavier cover, into a tree or a bush, or back under a boat dock, okay? In the post-spawn, if it's low light, I love to throw a big topwater or a big reaction bait, square bills, crankbaits, chatterbaits, prop baits, you know, a big stutter step right next to a boat dock or a bush or a ledge where it goes from shallow embankment to a deep drop off. Those females are going to be near that and they want to eat a big meal. This is also a good time to throw a big swim bait near the surface because in the post spawn, those big females are looking for a big meal to fatten back up. This is also a good time to skip a jig under a boat dock. So I start saying target post-spawn fish when that water temperature is around 64, 65 is a good time to start targeting post-spawn fish. And that's your post-spawn there. And also in your post-spawn, getting out to a windier bank is fine, okay? It's going to have more oxygen. The bigger females could be right in shallow water on those windier banks, but if it's calm and clear, they're either going to move down into some structure or cover, they're going to move under a boat dock. They don't want to be out. If that water's clear and calm, they're going to have a tough time hunting. They can't run down a bait fish in open water when it's clear and calm very easily. They're exhausted from spawning. They're going to be in that heavier cover. This is where you can pitch something like a Texas rig worm down into a big grass patch. If they're sitting down there hanging, that's going to get them, but it's not a good time to throw a reaction bait. You don't want to throw something moving in the middle of a sunny day when it's calm and clear. The water's calm and clear. That's not a good way to catch a big female. If you want to catch a big female in the post-spawn when it's calm and clear, you need to flip pitch into heavy cover. You need to get a deep crankbait down in there in the shade of some deeper rocks, or you need to skip a jig or something back under a boat dock where they're looking for secluded shade protection, something where a bluegill is going to swim in there and they can ambush. An easy meal in heavy cover or under something is absolutely critical. Unless it's low light or the water's dirty, then a reaction bait or a topwater is good. First thing in the morning, later in the evening, any topwater bait is going to be good. Now let's get into summer. We're all getting sunburned, it's getting hot out. So early summer is post-spawn / early summer. These fish are out on main lake points now. They're out in the stronger current if you're fishing on a river. They're buried in heavier cover. They're under heavier weed mats. They're way back up under boat docks. They are in a full summertime mode now. So summertime, always when it's low light, you want to fish a bait that moves fast. You want to cover water when it's low light. First thing in the morning, don't fish slow. This is the perfect opportunity to throw something like a buzz bait, a lipless crankbait, a regular crankbait, a square bill, something you can cover water with fast. Cast it out, retrieve it fast. Cast it out, retrieve it fast to where you get the sign of where that bigger, badder fish is. If it's clean water still, if it's dirty water still, first thing in the morning, they're gonna be up shallow and you can find them. So fish fast. you might not necessarily want to fish too big of a bait. Once that water temperature starts getting it hotter, you know, standard size bait can be the deal. Sometimes big swim baits lose their luster in the summertime, but you can fish something like a BWA 7, the bluegill segmented swim bait, because bass love to eat bluegills in the summertime. But you want to remember, in the summertime, the water starts getting a lot more green. Visibility is not as good, to where something like a glide bait loses its luster. A glide bait works better in cooler water, water below 70 degrees, that's cleaner. When they start losing their visual, the bass start needing a lot more audio. In the summertime, you're going to use louder baits, or you're going to use baits that can penetrate into heavier cover or structure. A bait, something like a jig, you can get back under a dock, or you can pitch it up into some wood to where there's some shade where those bass are going to be. So you have bass that are going to be deep in the summer. You guys have bass that are going to be shallow in the summer. So it's how you choose to target those. In the summertime, if you're fishing deep and it's calm out, you might not want to fish a crankbait if it's calm, because it's just too audible, it's too noisy. They'll catch on to it. If you got a little bit of wind, you know, and a little bit of overcast or something, or if it's first thing in the morning, a crankbait can be great. If the water's slightly murky, the crankbait can be great. If they're up shallow in grass, of course you don't want to throw a crankbait. That's where something you want to throw, like a swim jig. But if it's dirty, you might want it more audible, like a vibrating swim jig to go through there. So this is where you have to choose whether you're going to target shallow fish, whether you're going to flip, pitch, and punch into heavier cover, whether you're going to throw a frog up on top of mats in the summertime to where they'll blow through. Once that water temperature starts getting into the 70s, those fish are much more willing to get under that heavier cover and attack something going across the surface. Bass's primary favorite temperature is that 65 to 70 degrees, and sometimes up to 75 degrees in some areas that I fish. 65 to 75 degrees, bass are very active in eating frequently throughout the day. So this is where you don't want to spend a lot of time in one spot. If you're not getting bit, jump around. Try deep water, try shallow water, try an area with more current. If you find that it's outside of the spawn, you don't see bass spawning anymore, you're in that summertime mode, all right, and you're not getting bit, you might want to look for an area with more wind on it. And remember, in the summertime, we have a lot of steady conditions where it's like 80 degrees every day with very little wind for a week straight. This is where you want to pay attention to something like the moon phase. If you have a full moon, they might be feeding at nighttime, to where if you get out there first thing in the morning and you throw a reaction bait and you're not getting bit, they may have been actively feeding at nighttime, to where you may want to fish something smaller. This is where you want to throw a finesse setup, or try to fish it in heavier cover with smaller baits, just to get them to react. You're tossing them a french fry just to get them to eat it. And then when evening time rolls around, that's where you might want to start presenting that bigger, faster moving bait again, because it's a full moon and they've become acclimated to that. And the same thing goes with a new moon. It's dark out at nighttime, first thing in the morning, that bite's going to be better. So this is where, if you come out in the summertime, the water temperature's 65 to 75 degrees, you're out there and it's a new moon, it was dark all night, first thing in the morning, that's really where you want to throw a big, fast moving, big bait, because those bass are going to tell you on first light. They couldn't target easily all night. First light came, boom, that's their opportunity to feed. So get ready on those new moons in the summertime around that 65 to 75 degrees. That's a great time to throw a big reaction bait, a big topwater. So now let's get into later summer. Water temperatures pushing 80 something degrees. These bass are going to become lethargic, all right? Once that water starts getting into 80, upper 80s, bass really don't want to chase. They kind of get in the mindset of like wintertime. It's exhausting. Try to go out in 100-degree weather and run around, all right? And dude, you're gonna find yourself like, oh my gosh, you're exhausted. You want to find shade, you want to cool off. And the bass are the same way, all right? They'll get exhausted from chasing. So a lot of the time when that water gets into the 80s, You need to focus on fishing tighter to structure and cover, and really trying to find that key zone, flipping and pitching into that heavier cover, skipping under a boat dock and waiting for a second, way more than throwing a reaction bait. Some days I'll get out there and it's first thing in the morning and I'll see that water temperature is like 84 degrees. I won't throw a top water. I won't throw a fast moving bait. I'll immediately go to skipping docks or to punching heavy cover or fishing deeper with a jig on a rock pile, because I know it's a little too darn warm for them and they're gonna have a real tough time chasing. They won't want to chase. They're going to be much more lethargic and much more selective with what they eat. So remember, when it gets really hot, that's where sometimes you can throw like a drop shot or a shaky head later in the summer, but you got to remember it tends to be a little bit more dingy, the watercolor, so you want to make it more audible. So that's a good time to try fishing slower and in heavier cover. This is also a really good time to where when I know guys go out in the late summer and they were throwing frogs in the middle of the summertime and they're like, oh, we were catching a ton of fish, but they didn't realize that water, was mid 70s or low, almost 80, to where it wasn't super hot yet, to where the bass still had a lot of energy to blow up through those mats and grab those frogs. But what happens is once that water gets super hot, that's where you really want to just creep your frog. Just twitch it and let it sit on the mat. Billy Hines told me this, great angler out west here, how to really just twitch the frog and let it sit 10, 15 seconds at a time. And Billy gets big ones like that because it's sitting over them. They take their time, they get up there, then it twitches, boom, and they get that big meal and they settle right back there again. But versus if I was moving it fast over that mat, they wouldn't have came and got it. And this is also a time too when that water starts getting extra hot and you're flipping into heavier cover. This is where you really want to spend some time in the mat. When it's not too hot, when that water's still in the 70s, punching in mats, when it starts getting over 80, if I'm in the lower 70s and I'm punching through mats, I'm going to go fast. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in the mat, all right? But once that water starts getting super hot and I punch through there, I'm going to spend a little bit more time under there and move my lure a little bit more lethargic because they could be exhausted from the heat. So let's move into fall. Water temperature starting to cool off. That's a real easy way to tell if fall is there, all right? Let's say your water temperature is 85 degrees and you see it drop down to 80 and it's September or October and you see that water temperature starting to fall. What this does is it moves the bait fish. It starts to bring those bait fish up shallower, okay? In the summertime, the bait fish tend to be deeper. As the water temperature starts to drop, it tells all these bait fish, okay, we need to start migrating, okay? So what happens is all these bait fish start to move shallower and they're on the main lake points. They're at the mouths of creek channels. They're at the mouths of rivers. They're at the mouths of coves. And they're on this area that's not shallow, it's not deep, but they start moving in between. And what you're going to find is as the water temperature starts to cool, bass become much more willing to chase top water lures. They become much more willing to chase reaction lures, to where if you notice that cooling trend, you've seen the water temperature go from 85 down to 80, you might want to start throwing something like a lipless crankbait or a chatterbait or a top water or something faster moving, a swim bait, a little soft plastic swim bait through the middle of the water column, and you'll know right away, is it fall coming? Because you're going to start getting a lot more bites on that. So that stuff you were doing in the summertime, you might want to target fishing slower and in that heavier cover, but at the same time, if you notice a cooling trend, you might want to try fishing fast again, because as that water just starts to cool, those bass are much more willing to chase. They know it's cooling, they feel it, it's a relief to them to get out there and chase that stuff. Always, in the early fall, current is great. Wind blowing banks are great, all right? Main lake points, downwind areas are great. If you can find an area that's semi-stained, in the early fall, I don't like fishing super clear water. I don't like fishing really dingy water. I like water where I can see down 3 or 4 feet. And what you're really gonna find is that's where the bait fish are. And this is a rule that applies to all these months of the year, all these seasons, that what happens is, however deep you can see, and I've heard other pros talk about this, I forgot the pro's name, he was on Major League Fishing, Brett Ayler, I think, was talking about it. And he said if you could see 4 foot deep, his first target area is going to be 5 to 7 foot deep. And it's a great rule because bass really don't like to be where they can be seen from other fish. They don't like other fish to see them coming. So they get, a lot of the time, just below that visible point is where they start hunting. So in the early fall, that's what I like to do. I check to see if that bite's there. Otherwise, I'll stick to a late summer pattern to find them at that point. Mid-fall rolls around, okay, the water temperature's back into the mid-70s, lower 70s. This is really where the bait fish start moving back into these creeks. Bait fish style lures, top waters excel, buzz baits excel. They're now in the mouths of these creeks and they're moving shallower. The bait fish start getting, you know, in mid-fall, they're really shallow. Usually the bait fish are, you know, 10 feet or shallower. This is where I really like throwing lipless crankbaits. I like throwing buzz baits like the Evolution Baits Grass Burner. You can really find those fish once that water temperature cools off. And early in the morning, I'm going to throw a lot of that stuff. Midday, A-rigs are also really, really good around that time. Just like in the early spring, A-rigs are also really good. But as that water temperature starts to cool, those fish are going to become active and those bass are going to start schooling up again. To where if you catch a bass in mid-fall, don't move on so quick. More than likely there was more fish with him. And they still will move into heavier cover in the middle of the day. But if you start seeing bait balls on your fish finder, or if you start physically seeing shad busting, remember, those fish are willing to chase a reaction bait even in the middle of a sunny day. Now, let's move into later fall. Later fall is an exception, just like the pre-spawn. This is the fall feed, okay? Once that water temperature is now into the mid-60s, all right, nearing the lower 60s, these bass have an alarm that goes off on them that says eat, 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 eat. This is where big baits work good, okay? You could still throw something like a big frog or a big jig or a big swim bait like the esh trout here, and those bass are going to eat it. Even smaller bass will eat big swim baits in the later fall. All right, now I wanted to give you a clue here. What happens when that water temperature gets down in the later fall, nearing 60 degrees, they're eating a ton of bait fish. They're eating pretty much everything they can get. When that water gets below in the later fall, we're talking late fall into winter transition period. That's when we have another crawdad spawn. When that water temperature is around 55, 58 degrees, we have another big crawdad spawn. As soon as you stop seeing those fish attacking bait fish, look for those shallower rocky banks again that lead off into deeper water, and crawdads love that spawn. That late season spawn is when jigs and vibrating jigs and square bills can be phenomenal again. When that water just gets below 60, back into that mid 50 to almost 60 degrees, that's where we have that late crawdad spawn. We have an early spring crawdad spawn that starts around 52 to 55, and then in that later fall, transitioning into winter, we have another crawdad spawn again. Once that water temperature starts to get near that low 60 to upper 50s, the bass are going to start becoming much more selective on are they going to eat a topwater. Once that water temperature gets below 60 degrees, the majority of bass will stop eating topwater. They're going to eat subsurface and they're going to start eating off the bottom. Once it's below 55, they prefer to eat off the bottom primarily. So let's get into winter. Winter's when I say the water temperature is below 50, all right? Now, what happens when the water temperature is below 50, when it first gets below 50, those bass just had that fall feed, and you're getting to this point to where you may have some bass still in the fall feed, and you may have some trying to find their winter haunts, okay? If you're fishing a shallower pond, they're gonna be in the deepest part of the pond. If you're fishing a big lake, they're going to be inside a river channel or inside a creek channel, deeper, next to faster tapering banks. they're going to move into this area and they're going to start getting lethargic. This is where finesse fishing comes into play. Jerkbait fishing in the early winter, I'm talking, you know, that 50 to, you know, upper 40s to mid 50s. Early winter, jerkbaits can still work really well. Soft plastic swim baits can still work really well. A-rigs can work great. You still have options at moving baits to catch fish at that point. You can also yo-yo a lipless crankbait, let it fall to the bottom and yo-yo it, but everything is slowing down. Now, when deep winter sets in, I'm talking water in the mid 40s, even upper 30s. Finesse fishing is critical. Light line, small worms, drop shots, shaky heads, Ned rigs, finesse jigs, hair jigs. This is all really critical because bass become much less selective on the size of their target. I'm sure you guys have heard big baits, big fish. That sometimes applies in the wintertime, but I proved to some of my other expert buddies that you can catch tons of giant bass on little tiny baits in the dead of winter. I did it at Lake Comanche, I did it at Lake of the Pines. I put up a 30+ pound bag on a 3-inch Biwa armor crawl in 45-degree water because they're sitting there. They don't want to chase, okay? You can get them to chase sometimes like a big swim bait. It's risk versus reward. If a big swim bait's coming by, okay, and it's just outside their range, they know this meal can hold them over for a few days, so now it becomes an opportunity for them to come get a bigger meal. So that does apply, but the majority of the stuff giant bass are eating, I'm talking 10+ pound bass, are eating stuff this big. I've seen studies where they've cut open bass, I know, sad, in January and February, and they've had clams in them. Bass are eating clams. This is where a do-nothing style bait is huge. Drop shot, shaky heads, Ned rigs, really move it super slow. Tiny finesse jigs, super slow. This is where you have to target areas where you know you've caught them in late fall, early winter. They're going to be nearby on those deeper, rockier areas. Something that's going to get more sun, and the evening bite is going to be in your best interest in the wintertime. Those last couple hours in the evening, the bass are going to slightly warm up and they're going to be much more apt to eat. You need to start off with smaller lures, just like I said in early spring. You need to start off with smaller lures to find them. They're going to be schooled up and hanging out. If you throw something like a bigger moving bait, there could have been 25 bass in a school, and you threw a bigger, faster moving bait, you had no idea that you went past that school. But if you throw in a Ned rig or a shaky head, the odds of you getting bit by the majority of that school are much higher if you drag it through there, okay? You have to slow down. You can't cover a lot of water fast when it's really cold. So you get that bite on that smaller stuff, yes, you can try to upscale to go big fish, bigger bait, but you really don't have to. I've seen guys get confused on this subject. In the dead of winter, when it's super cold, I'll catch a 1 pounder, a 1 pounder, a 1 pounder, a 7, okay, on that same little tiny rig. What's happened is they're schooled up together, and that little tiny rig appeals to the little tiny guy, and it appeals to the big one when that water is super cold. Now, when you start getting into later winter, early spring, that's a transition period to where once wintertime starts to warm up again, if you see a slight warming trend in the water, if that happens and the water has to be clean, you can start yo-yoing a lipless again, you can start throwing a jerk bait again, you can start slow rolling a swim bait on the bottom again, a little soft plastic swim bait, or a bigger swim bait, if you see that water slightly warms. Also, in the dead of winter, if you see a warming trend and you know winter's far from being over, you see a warming trend, look shallow. A lot of the time, those big bass are going to come up that deeper taper and they're going to move up shallow, especially during the end of the day, the later parts of the day. So as you transition out and it gets closer to spring, remember, you see a slight warming trend and you know you're getting closer to that time of year where that water's going to start warming up, start fishing your lipless, start fishing your jerk baits again, and that should help you guys put more bass in the boat. I'm Nick the Informative Fisherman, and that's part 1 of this series. I'm going to refine it a little bit more after this and hopefully give you guys some more details. Thanks for watching.